What's up, YouTube? Ryan Panny here. Hope you guys are doing reasonably well. We are going to talk essential metal today. The second Atheist record, Unquestionable Presence. Came out in 91. Atheist, of course, being part of that late 80s, early 90s explosion of Florida-based death metal bands. Their peers being such good company as Obituary, Death, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, etc., etc. All these bands making their landmark recordings at the legendary Moore Sound Studios with producer Scott Burns. Except, yeah, Atheist is technically a death metal band. And yeah, they were based in Florida during the death metal boom. But do they really belong with all those bands I just mentioned? In comparison, their music was much more cerebral, much more nerdy in the way it was composed. Atheist, in contrast, never tried to bludgeon their listeners. They weren't super preoccupied with being ultra evil or blasphemous, despite the name Atheist, or gory. And meanwhile, these traits are key elements of bands like Cannibal Corpse and Deicide, the leaders commercially of this movement. Let's just put it this way. Among their peers in the Florida death metal movement, Atheists were the band least afraid to color way outside of the lines, so to speak, at least arguably until Cynic would put out Focus a couple years later. But this record, Unquestionable Presence, which came out in 1991, looking back, it stands as a truly unique record for its time. It is just a picture-perfect snapshot of just how far advanced Atheists were in comparison with their peers, both musicianship-wise, certainly, and creatively. Even the band Death, to be honest, whose record Human came out the same year as this one, and these two records are often credited in tandem for laying the groundwork for what would eventually become technical death metal. Look, Death were making amazing music at the time, don't get me wrong. Human, Individual Thought Patterns, these are classic albums. But when you listen to the two side by side, Human and Unquestionable Presence, Death were more dipping their toes into that technical progressive side of things, where Atheists were way further down the spectrum. So for one, as I've already kind of hinted at here, Unquestionable Presence is unquestionably, see what I did there, more intricate and more complex than any of its contemporaries were. We've already mentioned Human. You listen to these two records side by side, and Unquestionable Presence is definitely the more ambitious musicianship-wise of the two of them. Or there's a record like Suffocation's Effigy of the Forgotten, which without a doubt is lightning fast, but not nearly as complex as this record. And then to a lesser extent, we can talk about records like Autopsy's Mental Funeral, but it's not even close. And the thing is, this goes for the entire band. Actually, drummer Steve Flynn is one of the key distinguishing factors for Atheist. On this record, Steve Flynn is an absolute animal, and his drumming is what kind of sets the pace for Atheist to be so far ahead of everybody. Just his completely restless, fill-obsessed, sort of jazz-tinged, off-kilter, time-wise drumming. It's just such a huge part of what makes these songs constantly interesting and constantly unpredictable in a way that Atheist contemporaries just weren't. One of my absolute favorite examples of this is the drumming in the song Your Life's Retribution, where Steve Flynn just never gets comfortable. As soon as you feel like one groove has finally wrestled control of the ship, things just completely switch. It's the ultimate rhythmic ADD. And my other favorite example is the wild, erratic stop-start rhythms in the song Enthralled in Essence. These drum rhythms are just mesmerizing to listen to. And I just, for the love of God, and I mean that with all puns intended in this case, I just wish that more death metal drummers played like this, with this much vigor and this much relentless commitment to keeping you on your toes as a listener. Death metal listeners can handle this shit. We're already listening to death metal. And when I listen to modern bands like, look, I love them, but Arch Enemy, where every single fucking song on the drums is just it makes me want to kill myself, especially when I've just listened to Atheist. I've felt for a long time that more drummers should adopt this type of approach. Tony Choi on bass too, rounding out the rhythm section here, just really shines all over this record. Listen to that amazing bass solo in the bridge section of Incarnation's Dream, or the fucking slap bass in the song Brains, wow. Or the aforementioned track Enthralled in Essence, his performance in the intro there, which frankly is an absolutely crazy performance from all band members. And later in that track, if we're switching over to guitars here, there are those crazy twin guitar parts that appear right before the solo, where both guitars are playing completely contradictory things. And it doesn't necessarily sound like madness. It's not like, it doesn't sound completely avant-garde, because they're both sort of in the same key, but you're just like totally thrown off as a listener. You'd hear the massive influence this would have in the 21st century on records like Arsis, We Are the Nightmare, where bands have the balls to compose something where two guitars play something completely different, and somehow, by some non-music theory miracle, it sort of works. And Atheist music, without a doubt, is one of the very earliest examples of this sort of unconventional guitar composition. And the thing is that you'll notice is that every instrument instrument on Unquestionable Presence is given equal weight. And when we're classifying genres in metal, that's often the sign of a prog or a tech record, because in more straightforward and more mainstream or more conventional metal, songs are more or less a showcase for guitar riffs. And the rhythm section, just as in rock music or hard rock music, is more just there for support. But on Unquestionable Presence, you notice that every instrument is given equal time to noodle. And the band just completely embraced the occasional chaos that results from that, like in the song Brains, or that middle section of Formative Years. These are perfect examples of what that sounds like in practice. But not only was Unquestionable Presence unique in the playing and the technicality of the band members, which we've obviously established here, but it was also, for a death metal record, noticeably different in terms of its aesthetic and its mood. You'll notice on the title track, for example, that the actual note choices here aren't super evil or diabolical sounding. This record is frankly too busy spinning your head to have to compensate and go out of its way to be real demonic and disgusting with the actual notes and chords being chosen for the songs. A lot of the musical hallmarks of death metal are kind of absent or at least minimally represented on this record. There's not an overabundance of the notorious flat 5 note or the minor second half step. Somewhere buried in all this craziness is a lot of traditional metal influences. On the title track here, and also a lot of the opener, Mother Man, in terms of actual note choices, Atheists have a lot more in common with their thrash and new wave of British heavy metal forefathers than they do with Cannibal Corpse. The title track is basically just like a techie mid-80s thrash number, just with a much more interesting and engaging rhythm section. And even the more pummeling material on here, like the song Brains, the actual notes that are being played at lightning speed, mind you, are more dorky than mean. Seriously, this record has a whole different emotional vibe than the much nastier, much more hellish sounding death metal that was coming out of Florida at the same time. And that's significant. Atheists really helped make death metal a lot more three-dimensional. They showed that, yeah, it was about playing your ass off, but it didn't have to be about gore and blood and evil. Remember, even a band like Death, who are obviously credited with revolutionizing the genre, deservedly so, still made albums like Leprosy and Scream Bloody Gore. Atheists showed up and right out of the gate were like, no, fuck all that. I would also like to call attention to the song An Incarnation's Dream, which is one of the absolute best songs on this album and really captures its brilliance in under 5 minutes. First off, of course, there's that intro with the gorgeous acoustic guitar and that ever so slightly distorted solo that goes over it. But then from there, this song just so effortlessly alternates between being one of the absolute noodliest songs on the album, with all those odd time changes in the bridge and that little jazz section as well, to being one of the absolute most punishing too. Like around that 4-minute, 20-second mark of this song, you get one of the few examples on this record of just straight ahead death metal, similarly around the 2-minute mark. And it's just a thrilling listen the way this song simultaneously confuses you and then pummels you in other parts. And frankly, it makes those straight ahead death metal parts really leap out because you've been stuck in this labyrinth of complex rhythms. I think one example of a band in the modern era that does that really well is Between the Buried and Me, who are without a doubt indebted to Atheists in a lot of ways. To that end, Unquestionable Presence is really unique, man. Like I said, it obviously laid the groundwork for all technical death metal that would come in its wake, but it also just proved that this very new genre at the time, death metal, was capable of being way more diverse, way more high-minded, and way more unpredictable than that initial slew of bands might have led people to believe. And then, of course, a couple years later, Cynic would up the ante even further, and we do have to give a lot of credit to latter-era Death for helping change that perception of death metal as well. In terms of Atheist specifically, their debut, Piece of Time, is another great album. It just, to me, the production on that one is inferior to Unquestionable Presence. I think Scott Burns just kept getting better and better with each release. And the songwriting on Piece of Time sort of reeks of the late 80s, at least in parts, whereas the songwriting on Unquestionable Presence is front to back, very forward thinking, and therefore sounds more timeless now. But there is a debate out there to be had about the best Atheist record. I'm not trying to say that Unquestionable Presence is the only good music that they put out. Just to me, it's always been the best Atheist record. Such a unique record. It is a gem of extreme metal. And it's a record that, unlike recent records that I've covered on this segment, like Storm of the Light's Bane by Dissection or The Gathering by Testament, it's a record that has yet to be successfully duplicated. Like, there are 1,000 Testament and Dissection clones out there, but no one has come even close to making Unquestionable Presence. It's a record that truly stands on its own, even almost 30 years later. So go listen to it. You will thank me later, I promise you. And as always, thank you so much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this video and are not yet subscribed to my channel, please consider doing so by clicking right over here, as well as checking out any of the other rock or metal related content that I publish here on a weekly basis. I really appreciate you watching, liking, disliking, just engaging in any fashion. Twitter, Instagram handle @RyanPannyMusic. Again, thank you so much for watching, guys, and I will see you soon.